paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Illegal in 47 states. It's the dirtiest sport in the world. Cockfighter. Not since the Hustler has the savage underbelly of the gambling world been so nakedly exposed. Warren Oates stars as Frank Mansfield, professional.
And my bird here, he can beat anything you got to show, man. Anything.
Cockfighter, a violent man in the sport that kills. He's got an animal instinct for winning and women.
The drive in it is to be the best.
And he'll do anything to come out on top.
Winning is the name of the game.
Cockfighter. From governor's mansions to cheap hotels, it's the big money sport that's dirty, violent, and outside the law. From the award-winning book that takes a searing look at the men with the lust to win and the women who spur them on. Warren Oates is the Cockfighter. Rated R. Under 17 not admitted without parent or guardian.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Jedidiah Ayres.
You know there's no 2-ounce leeway in official SCT hack.
Also back in the booth is Ms. Heather Drain.
Hello, hello.
On this episode, we are discussing Monte Hellman's Cockfighter. Released in 1974, the film stars Warren Oates as Frank Mansfield. When he came to town with his cock in his hand, all the women swooned, and what he did with it was illegal in 47 states. In other words, Frank Mansfield is a professional cockfighter, the ancient game of pitting two roosters against one another for sport. The film was based on Charles Willeford's book of the same name, and Willeford wrote much of the finished screenplay. We will be discussing his work and ruining this movie as we go along, so if you don't want Cockfighter spoiled for you, please turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen it. We will still be here. So, Jedidiah, when was the first time you saw Cockfighter, and what did you think?
I was aware of the book first, and I read the book probably 15 years ago. I saw the movie probably 2 or 3 years after that. So probably more than a decade, but I can't remember exactly when it was I first saw it. But I loved the book. I liked the movie quite a bit, and I've liked it increasingly with rewatches. Part of it just being I love Warren Oates on screen, and he didn't get to be the star of too many movies, and this was just a great vehicle for him. Yeah, I love the film, though. I don't think I've ever seen it on DVD, like a nice kind of pristine version of it. I think all the stuff I've seen has been muddy, and I hope I get the chance to get one of those nice copies of it someday.
And Heather, how about yourself?
This was a first-time watch for me. This was a film that had been on my need-to-watch list for a long time. Of course, I was familiar with it. I also knew that Kayla Janice is a huge fan of it. Of course, she has a book. I'm so glad you're going to get to interview her. She is like the grand poobah of this film, so that's very exciting. And of course, to quote Jedidiah, or to cite him, Warren Oates is a god to me. He is an acting god. If he's in anything, I will watch it. And so I was like, this was the perfect impetus for me to watch it. I still need to read the book. I am super neophyte, Cockfighter universe. And also, kudos for the rampant dick jokes and the introduction.
That's all from, oh gosh, why am I blanking on the gentleman's name who produced Thunder and Lightning, and which was another vehicle with Charles Willeford in it and David Carradine. I guess David Carradine stars in it, and Charles Willeford has a 5-minute part in it. Him and Joe Dante and Alan Arkush were all making up the lines for this trailer, and including those that I was quoting above, which I don't know if they ever made it to any of the trailers, the Born to Kill or any of those, but we'll definitely be talking about the retitlings and recuts as we go along here. Yeah, this one, I'm trying to remember how I came to this movie because Monte Hellman was a real big cipher for a long time. People knew of some of his works, but I wasn't aware of him as a person. And I think I got to know him through the producing work that he did on Reservoir Dogs, and then eventually interviewed him for an old issue of Cashiers. And that was back when it was still really tough to find his movies. It was ordering Two Lane Blacktop through Video Search of Miami. When it comes to this movie, I found a VHS copy of it at Suncoast or Sam Goody or one of those. And the back cover of this VHS tape, speaking of shitty quality Jedidiah, this looked absolutely awful, but this was the copy on the back of the book. And I think you're both going to enjoy this. Take a dark and eerie walk deep into the Georgia backwoods where those who aren't welcome don't always come out. Warren Oates wants to be the king of the roost in the rough and dangerous southern underground where moonshine, cockfights, hard luck, and wild nights are all part of his game. This ain't no place for the timid, and Oates uses his fists, knives, and whatever else it takes to get what he wants and hold on to what he's got. The plot thickens when Oates crosses the wrong guys and learns about mountain-style justice the hard way. A riveting look at a side of life where most civilized people can't even imagine. Ain't but for one law in these parts, and they don't care who lives or dies.
Yeah, that's much more befitting the Thunder and Lightning copy than Cockfighter, but yeah.
You know what's weird? That's actually the Drain family crest. I can't believe they cribbed our whole family's lineage like that. Good Lord. You would think S.F. Brownrigg directed this movie. And I say that loving Brownrigg, but holy sh! They purple prose the hell out of that description.
And this was, so the video stopped when they showed the title of it. It was very much like when I watched Disco Godfather the very first time, and the video stops and they put in Chiron over it, The Avenging Disco Godfather. So they changed the title. But with this one, it stops and they pasted Born to Kill over Cockfighter. But as far as I know, it's the exact same movie that we saw. It is no different. There were no knife fights or moonshine or any of that shit in here. Instead, it was the movie that we see these days. And yeah, I have yet to find that alternate cut with like dream sequences and all of these crazy things. But what this was, and when I finally saw it, I was just blown away. I'm not that into cockfighting, but I am very much into the big three. That's Warren Oates, Monte Hellman, and Charles Willeford. And this movie has those elements in spades, including Charles Willeford acting in this. So my heart was just all aflutter when I got to see this.
I wasn't aware really of Charles Willeford. I'd seen Miami Blues and I knew it was based on a book probably about 20 years ago or so. I first became aware of Charles Willeford and had some friends who were big Willeford heads and started reading. I think Cockfighter's the first one I read. And I remember reading it because I was sick, and I was so thankful I was sick because I didn't have to go to work and I could just stay in bed and read all day. I had young kids at the time and I was just exhausted, and I was like, nope, I have a great excuse just to stay in bed and read all day. And I read probably 2 or 3 books over the course of a few days. Cockfighter was one of them, and it really made an impression. I loved it. And yeah, it wasn't for a few years after that that I realized there'd been a movie adaptation. Willeford was definitely my initial interest in Cockfighter. And then about the time I saw the movie, I was really starting to hone in on realizing that I really like Warren Oates as a screen presence. Yeah, but yeah, Willeford for me first, and then of course the rest of the cast too, Harry Dean Stanton, and it's just lovely to watch the two of them hang out on screen. Any chance to do that, I'm down for.
Yeah, I don't remember how I came to Williford or how Williford came to me. I'm pretty sure my friend Rich Osmond turned me on to him. I don't remember when that was. So this was Cashiers du Cinéma number 5. And by issue 9, they weren't a yearly thing. They were a as soon as I possibly can type of thing, which sometimes was 2 years or more. By issue 9, I was writing about Williford overall. And with that one, I was so glad I was able to track down the Cockfighter journal and read his book about the behind the scenes stuff, which is fascinating as well. But the only thing I really remember from that whole book was him just complaining about Laurie Bird so much. He just could not stand her. And then reading Kayla Janice's book, it sounds like it was a pretty big club that he was part of when it came to the We Can't Stand Laurie Bird club.
I remember hearing that on the Tulane Blacktop commentary that they were irritated with her, especially because they were musicians and she was singing and she really couldn't hold a tune. And apparently they were chomping at the bit every time she would sing on screen. And Monte Hellman was having to tell, nope, you got to take it. You got to sit there and take it. And they were irritated by that. I think she's fun on screen, though. I like her.
I think she's perfect in this movie.
The cast of this film blew me away. And I expected part of that because of who's in it. But the authenticity, they nailed it. This feels so real. You could practically smell this movie. And that's not always a good smell. But I love that. And the fact that it's like, of course, it's authentic. We have Charles Williford involved. He's literally in the movie. I found out he was from my home state. He was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. And it feels authentic because that's the thing. You can always tell whenever somebody who's not familiar with the South is making a movie because it's just like bad hee-haw accents, even when they're trying to do serious dramas. I remember seeing the trailer for Hillbilly Elegy, which, yeah, God, if we knew then. But and seeing Glenn Close. And Glenn Close is a fabulous actress, but her accent, oh my God. It was about as authentic as Shirley Q. Licker, which, yeah, that's a deep cut there for any radio fans. But this film, it just feels not only authentic to the locale, and the actors feel authentic to that, but it feels very honest. Because there's something about, like, in rural communities where there's not a lot of money. And it's like you have this necessity that kind of breeds desperation. You have a necessity that breeds brutality. It's a hard life. And I feel like this film, even though our protagonist is not a good person and he does a lot of really crummy things, he's a human being. And everybody in this film is a human being. And there's such a respect with that. There's not a judgment with that. And I absolutely love that about this film because I think that's a hard line for a lot of storytellers, whether you're doing prose or film, can do it well.
The elements that you would take to sell a picture like this, like you're reading off the jagged copy on the VHS, all that stuff that would be so played up is very much just the day-to-day reality here. And it's shrugged off. People, but like when the robbery happens, that just price of doing business. We understand this is going to happen. It wasn't approached and handled like a big set piece, like a suspense sequence or something like that. It was just, and here's one more thing that this life entails. And yeah, so there was a lot of that, to Heather's point, of brutality is just part of the life. But again, no, he's not a good guy. And there's a certain respect given to the people who live this lifestyle, and that it's treated matter-of-factly. And it's not particularly titillating, and judgment is withheld. So,
which I really appreciate, because I think even to this day, a lot of people have in our culture look down upon people that live, especially if you're living in a poor rural area, and you don't have access to good education. The public school system's dodgy enough in our country and well funded. areas. And it's this film does exactly what it should, because it's not justifying any bad behavior. It's not glorifying it, it's not condemning it. It's just, here's the story. And I love that. And with Laurie Bird's character, they could have done more pathos with her, because I really get the feeling, and a friend of mine and my husband's, our friend Randall, has this phrase. He's like certain people, it's almost like they're like a hamburger wrapper in the wind. It's just they're living their life in this way. And you feel like this poor girl, it's just like this hamburger wrapper in the wind, just floating to, and she's young, but just floating to whatever guy, and is literally sold. She's property. And just the way that we hear him refer to her, just like, oh, she's a pretty girl. She's a good lay. She'll land on her feet. And it's good gravy. I mean, of course, at least she ends up with Harry Dean Stanton. That's not too bad. Everything is so smartly handled. They could have had more pathos, the whole robbery, which I honestly, if this was a more traditional movie, would you guys have been surprised if one of the guys in the mask was Steve Railsback? I totally was expecting that. I don't know why. I think it's just because I like to see Steve Railsback. My brain was like, give me more Railsback. It's just all the little touches. Omar hiding his money in the bathtub full of chicken carcasses. Insane, but such a great touch.
Yeah, it's really a simple film when you boil it down, because it's this guy who's got this code of ethics, right or wrong. It's his code and he's going to live by it, especially he shot off his mouth and was drinking too much, boasting about his cock and how his cock would be undefeated. And yeah, Harry Dean Stanton took him up on it. It was like, all right, let's see it. And they had their little cockfight in the hotel room. He ends up losing his prize rooster and he's sunk. He cannot go to the Southern, the Southern Cocker Tournament or whatever it is, the big thing that he's living his life for. And then he makes a promise to himself, I will not speak or drink again until I win that medal. And that's his whole thing. Laurie Bird calls him on it. Hey, I heard you talking in your sleep last night. If you can talk while you're sleeping, you can talk while you're awake. He just does not want to explain to her what is going on with him. He doesn't want to explain to anybody. And he just wanders his way through stuff. And once he loses that initial match that we see in the movie, he's given, okay, now I got to figure this out. And that's the whole movie, is him moving from place to place, getting money, trying to buy these chickens from Ed Middleton, this now retired judge of cockfighting, and training this bird up, partnering with Omar Berdinsky, the Richard Schul character, who I just fucking love, and their pal Buford, who's played by Robert Earl Jones, the father of James Earl Jones, who we just learned passed away today. So that's a real shame. But yeah, I love the chemistry of those guys. And the ending of the movie kind of sneaks up on you, because it's just basically them going through all these tournaments. And the next thing, they're at the big tournament. It's almost like a Bad News Bears type of thing. Like, we're going to go through and pick off all of these smaller competitions, and we get to see all these adventures that they go on. We get to see, Steve Railsback, get to see Ed Begley Jr. in here going absolutely apeshit with a fucking hatchet going after Frank.
I love that. And especially because you get the feeling his character's a little mentally off. And then you hear, and he's going after War Notes with an axe, and War Notes is almost drowning him. And and I believe that character was his father, right?
Yes. Yeah. You might want not to hold him under the water so long.
It's like, that family tree does not have a lot of branches. And baby Ed Begley Jr., like this film, we get Millie Perkins for 5 minutes. And Troy Donahue, I was like, I kept feeling like, it's a mad, mad, mad world, but with just cool character actors. It's such the only thing missing was Joe Spinell, but he's not Southern. We love Joe, but Joe's so New York. It would have worked out. But I'm so glad you mentioned Omar. Omar was my favorite character. He's like the farmer poet. Like the way he talks, and Scholl's performance is so magnetic. And he's just almost like this gentleman, just sparkle in his eye, gentleman farmer with a way with words, and just talking about lightning. And I loved him and Buford so much. I'm like, these two were characters. I'm like, I wouldn't mind hanging out with these guys. They seem nice. They're lovely. Cockfighting is awful.
It is. I love the book, of course. You get a lot more out of the Frank character because it's all internal monologuing. So you understand him a little bit better, but by God, you get swayed by him. You buy into his bullshit a lot more about what he's doing, being a noble pursuit. And he's talking about how much he loves, like his real love for these birds. And he's just describing the routine he's going through to train them and things like that. And then he's just torturing them to death. He's got two birds that are siblings, and he figures he can push one until it kills him, so he knows what the other one can take, and he can push him. And it just torches this bird to death while he's talking about how much he loves him. And yeah, it was a real. Warren Oates is great, but it is different having even the voiceover that is in there is a little less. It's less compelling than for making these types of arguments than really living with this voiceless character's inner voice through the pages of the books. I carried that with me into watching the movie, and I'm curious for people who haven't read the book if it's how much of that they bought into Frank's kind of bullshit. Because I bought into it, and then I realized how awful he was, and it was hilarious, but it was awful.
I don't think you read the book, so how much did you buy into his bullshit?
Let's just say I wouldn't be one of the ladies. How was the intro swooning over his massive cock or whatever that the cock talk was? But yeah, it's more, to me, that's what helps is I think a lesser actor, it would have been toast. Not the movie, the movie as a whole. Good Lord. Yeah. Monte Hellman, Louis Teague, the editing's great. The cinematography is fantastic. Like Master Almendros. I know I'm butchering that. Sorry, sir. But fabulous cinematographer. But you need an actor to pull off that character who you can't help but just even look at and be like, I like this guy. He's just got a presence about him. Frank's many flaws, I think, is what made him interesting. He approaches cockfighting, and I hope I'm not talking on my ass with this analogy, but to me, it's almost like he moves like an addict. He literally sells the house that his brother and his wife are living in so he could get money to keep cockfighting.
Mm-hmm. I hope he made a little bit more than $500 out of that transaction.
He sells his brother's house out from under him. I'm sure he made a little more, but yeah, he wants $500 to buy Ed Middleton's cock.
This violent sport, and I have to say, like, the scenes of cockfighting were very hard for me to get through. I feel, especially as I've gotten, like, to the point in my life now, like, seeing animal violence in films, it's never that it was easy when I was younger, but it's really hard for me now. Like, I'm so sensitive, and I did have to cover my eyes through some of it just because I just can't. I don't know. It just hurts my heart to see the innocent suffer. It is filmed like a dance. And I think the way the film approaches this, and it's awful. This is such a horrible thing these poor animals have to do. But it films it like a dance. And that is so compelling. And that also, I think, helps to what we were just talking about with Frank. Because this is a dance he is so invested in. You get the feeling he defines his soul almost, who he is as a human, with his fiancée, Mary Elizabeth, who we meet. And she basically, you can tell she loves him. She's like, I don't want you doing this. I don't want to be living like this. And which is more than understandable, which is more than reasonable. And he invites her to this big fancy derby so she could see him in the ring. And I was like, what a stunning thing to be like, this is such a huge part of you that if you're going to love me, I want you to see me at my work, which did not go well for him in the romance department. little romantic note for anybody who's single. Don't do cockfighting. It's illegal.
He doesn't want to end up like Ed Middleton, who is being pressured to get out of cockfighting. He won't admit it to Frank, but his wife is like, okay, sure, I'll do that. I'll sell this prize rooster for $500, which Frank is never going to be able to pay me that money. I know he's not going to be able to. So then, he turns around, sells that house out from under his ne'er-do-well brother, his brother who, and I'm sorry, I'm going off of a lot of stuff in the book, so a lot of stuff that doesn't come across in the movie, but Frank was not the golden child because he was the guy who went off and was doing this whole cockfighting thing. So his dad said, okay, I'm giving everything to your brother, to Randall, I think his name is. And Frank was like, no, that if any court in the South would read the Bible and know primogeniture and know that I'm the one that deserves all this stuff. So I'm going to fuck over my brother to get this money so I can start this new cockfighting venture, because he doesn't want to be poor and he wants to win this thing so much. And yeah, you're right. It is very much like he's got an addiction, and it's all, so much of the book is, how do I get money? How do I get money? I'm going to go back to this guy, this doctor who sells salves and balms, and he has this new anti-indigestion medicine that he's trying to get off the ground. He owes me money. I'm going to go to him. I'm going to get money out of him. No, he doesn't have any money. Okay, I'm going to go to my brother and try to get money out of him. No, he doesn't have any money. Fuck my brother. I'm going to just sell this fucking house and take all this money that way. Yeah, he is desperate to do this. And he goes through so much. There's a whole character, a whole section that's in the book that isn't in the movie, where he's going out and playing music at a bar. He eventually gets picked up by this woman, Bernice, who takes him home, and she agreed to pay him $20 to play for all of her fancy friends and family. And when she goes to give him a $50 at the end of the night, he's just, oh, no way. I agreed to $20, not $50. Like, again, those principles come up. So what's he do? He ends up sleeping with her, taking the $50, breaking his guitar, and leaving it on her front porch to be like, this is the extra $30 that you gave me. My guitar is worth about $30. I'm just like, you are fucking insane. And all of Charles Willeford's protagonists are insane. They all are obsessed with things. They're always going after things. They always have weird little quirks and stuff. And I'm just like, they're fascinating to me to read these characters because they are all fucked up in one way or another.
They remind me of a middle ground between a Michael Mann, very driven, code living character, and a Darren Aronofsky, or someone who's society thinks they're crazy, but they've got this muse that they're going to follow to the end. And it's that middle ground. Frank would see himself, I think, more like a Michael Mann character, maybe more like the guy in Jericho Mile, who's just running, and he's not running it's not competition. It's not whatever. It's just, this is how I'm doing my time. This is how I keep the world from owning me, is I just run. And that's what he's going to do. But yeah, I hadn't really thought of it as an addict story, but hearing you guys describe it that way, it makes sense. And I do think it maybe brings those two sort of, one is perhaps nobler than the other, but they almost touch. And I think Cockfighter maybe is the bridge that connects them that way.
Talking about the whole chasing the money, you feel like it's never going to be enough. He could win the most amount of money, and he's just going to use that to keep the cycle going. But
it's not even the money. I think he earns $1,000 for it. It's that fucking medal. He just wants that medal. And that medal's what triggers his whole flashback. Like when Middleton shows him the medal, he's just like, this could have been yours, but you talk too much and you drink too much. And then that triggers that flashback. And I can't remember if it was Brad Stevens or who it was writing about, does Frank ever come out of the dream sequence? Is he just in that dream sequence for so much of this movie? Because the way that Hellman presents it, it isn't like a typical dream sequence. It's not like the screen gets blurry or the edges fog up or something. You're just like, Okay, that's interesting. And then this writer, whoever it was, and I apologize if it was Brad or somebody else, was talking about the scene with Omar being robbed. And that's the only time that we really move away from Frank. And we aren't with Frank because almost every single scene he's in, but that's the one time that we go away. And it's also all taking place in a hotel room, which is where Frank's humiliation was. They all end up taking off their pants at the end of this robbery. And so it's just, is this like some sort of weird sexual humiliation that Frank went through with Jack Burke, the Harry Dean Stanton character? Yeah, it might be a little bit out there, but it is interesting that this is the only time that we don't see Frank in the movie, that we just stick with Omar. And meanwhile, they're cross-cutting it with Frank. And I believe it's the whole scene with Ed Begley Jr., where he's cheating and they have to rosin up the rooster's feet and all that. And yeah, that scene's amazing. And that's all, again, somebody trying to welch on a deal. Ed Begley Jr.'s father tries to welch on this deal. Oh, sorry, I don't have $1,000. I only have $300. And then Steve Railsback tries to welch on a deal as well. It's just like, oh, I don't have the $25. And they have to push him down and grab his wallet and be like, no, you got plenty of money here, Junior. This is what you get for trying to stick your finger up a chicken's ass.
His daddy told him, though, you got to show him how to stick a finger up a cock's ass.
I loved that. The way he said, my daddy, like, I don't know, just hearing Steve Railsback say that, baby Steve Railsback at that. Like, this is 2 years before Helter Skelter. And so that was amazing. There's so many great shots in this film, too. There's one, and this is early on, where at one of the early cockfights, you hear a little boy just crying, which, yeah, that's the thing. Why would you take your children to that? And that's what my daddy told me. But yeah, but the little boy, and this shot like haunts me. This is such a brilliant shot. He's crying and he's covering his eyes with what looks like a $1 bill. And that just, that just hit me so hard. And just, this is the horrors of what we do for money, of what just in our society is like this. It's the innocent. Again, to me, it's like the innocent suffer. And even the fact that the robbers, aren't they all wearing like president masks?
A little Point Blank all those years beforehand.
And just that shot, the way they did the superimposition of Mary Elizabeth sitting by the lake, you notice how they're transitioning to him going to the real estate office to cuckold his brother out of money. But that superimposition of her lasts longer than it normally would in a movie. It adds just to this sort of haunting tone of, this is what he's leaving behind. This is having any sense of healthy love, any sense of just normalcy and gentility is gone.
Yeah, I really picked up a lot more this time listening to the book. Just the way that women are treated in the book between Dodie and Bernice and Mary Elizabeth. It's like Dodie, you see this in the movie, that she has started to wash some of Frank's clothes, but she hasn't finished. And so they're just all in a wet bucket filled with water, and he throws those clothes at her. And then later on, when he meets Bernice, after they have sex, she's just compelled to do something for him. And so she goes in and washes his underwear in the sink. So it's like more wet clothes, and they're still wet when he tries to sneak out. So he's just like, guess I'm leaving these things here. So I'm just like, how many times is it like women, not only were women washing for him, but then they would also cook for him. And you get that also in the movie, but like Bernice cooks for him. Dodie doesn't cook for him. I don't even think she knows how to cook that well. She talks about hungry man dinners. And then his sister-in-law, she cooks for him as well. And it's just, what are women just cooking and cleaning vehicles in this book and movie? And I think they are. So I don't think that's going to change my opinion of Charles Willeford, but it was just pretty funny to realize just how the status of women is just so low in Cockfighter.
The chickens, they're treated better than the chickens, but not by much.
I think Dodie White is almost a rooster when she comes in and starts attacking him, and she's wearing that bright red outfit. I'm just like, is she a rooster now? Yeah, and I love how Omar's got that line about, What are the odds on Mrs. Birch?
I love Omar. Yeah, any other character would say that, I'd be like, you sexist pig. And Omar says it. And I'm just like, oh, you're so funny. Oh my God. You know, washing a strange man's underwear after a one night stand? That's, whew.
He was offended too, because that was clean underwear. How dare she?
Oh, I highly doubt they were clean. Let's be honest. Let's think about the life Frank's living. Those drawers are about as clean as the little nasty floor that Ed Begley's chicken died on. Plate drawers, yeah. Thank God that wasn't in the movie. I'm glad that didn't make it into the film.
Apparently, Bernice was in there for a long time, and there's even an ending with Bernice in there because I don't know if she takes the place of Mary Elizabeth, but I think it's a torn between two lover type of things between Bernice and Mary Elizabeth. And I want to say the book ends that way as well. This whole thing of the ending of the movie with him ripping the head off of the chicken and putting his cock in her purse, which is always the Freudian vagina metaphor. So it's just like, okay, we're having sex, I guess, here? Or is he saying, I will give up my manhood for you? Because there is that whole thing of like, how dare these women try to change us men? Middleton's got it, and here's Frank. Take this. Just, that moment. It's bad enough when he cuts the head off of that one rooster. It's just so matter-of-factly. But then for him to pull the fucking head off of a chicken at the end of this movie, hand it to her, that disgust on her face, and when she puts it in the handkerchief and just reads in the riot act. I love her speech at the end of this about how she just wasn't watching the chickens. She was watching him and just saw no love, no pity, nothing, and just saw what a man he really is. But then she takes that talk from him. I'm just so surprised. And then his little, she loves me, Omar, at the end. Wow. What a fucking way to go with this. What do you guys think as far as she loves me, Omar? What does that mean to you guys?
Yeah, I think it signifies just, it's another teller about just how he sees the world and how he sees anybody else would look at him and his life. And most people in the movie too, and say, what a loser. What an absolute waste of a life. But he's determined not to see himself that way. He's determined not to have the values of the world. And he's decided this medal, this prize is of value, and I'm going to treat everything as less than that and get there. And anybody else, including I think there are probably a fair amount of spectators and competitors there who don't give a shit about the medal. They just want to make money. They're gamblers. They're whatever. They want to make money. They want to do that. And they don't care about that kind of standing. But he's decided this is what's worthwhile in his life. And he's going to sacrifice everything toward that. And yeah, at the end, when she's so angry and disgusted with him, I think, I don't know, it seems more like a spin, like him going, aha, I've moved her. I've got a real reaction out of her. She loves me.
Was he just negging her in the parlance of our times?
I don't know. I think it's insight into how he sees the world and how he sees himself and how he's determined to see himself. And it seems almost like an arbitrary declaration, but it's one he's going to probably live the rest of his life by. Whether they're together or not, he'll have something in the back of his head saying, I've got a woman who loves me. She's disgusted. We don't spend any time together. I haven't seen her in 20 years or whatever, but she loves me. I decided she did. So she does.
Really pick up the Freudian thing at all, I have to say, with that whole scene. But I think I don't typically look at purses like pseudo vaginas. I don't pick up my purse and be like, hello, my little punani. I don't know. But I thought it was such a cool ending, though. I loved her speech I love that performance. And especially because she's really like she's not prim, but she seems like the most out of all the characters, especially of all the women we meet. She's the one that's got probably a good head on her shoulders. She's the closest to normal. She really will be fine regardless. And him tearing that head off, I have to admit, my initial reaction was like, good gravy. Have I not seen enough animal cruelty in this fucking movie? Good Lord, dude. What is wrong with you? This poor animal. Poor little White Lightning. Justice for White Lightning, the chicken. But I do love that they named that. That's a nice little moonshine reference. Any George Jones fans out there will immediately get. But and then hands, and it's almost like he's like jabbing its deceased beak in her palm of her hand because she looks like she's in pain. It's so violent. It's not violent enough that he just tore this dead bird's head off its body, and then he's got to force it in her hand. And I loved her. I was like, her wrapping it. That's a power move. That was a power move. To me, I didn't view it as a sexual thing at all. I viewed it as, wait, you want to get crazy with me? Okay, I'm still going to remain a lady. I am in charge of this situation. You're not the man I thought you were. You probably never were, which I thought was a great and really heavy line. And it also made me wonder, like, how was he before all those? Like, how was he? I got to read the book, but do you really get that? Actually, since you both have read the book, do you get a sense of who he was before he got into cockfighting in the book? Or is it just pretty much you're into the cockfighting journey?
He talked more and he drank.
He makes a mention at the very beginning in the voiceover, and it's so close to the beginning of the movie that I think it's almost in danger of being not heard, where he says something like, I got into race cars and I did this and I did that, which of course makes some people think, oh, maybe he was GTO from Two Lane Blacktop, and this is like his punishment for talking too much as GTO. Yeah, it's like he has tried all of these other things, but they didn't have the drive to perfection that he thinks that cockfighting has, and that he just knows that if you follow the rules and if you train your bird properly, then you can win this thing, which it doesn't feel like for him. At least this is me saying this. I don't think that he admires what he considers the perfection of this and thinks that if he can do the best job, he will get the reward. It's the American dream, basically. It's if you do hard work and do everything that you're supposed to, say your prayers before you go to bed, brush your teeth, all that stuff, you're going to get rewarded. And that's what he thinks. And he finally does in this. But even to that point, I don't know what he's going to do after. Like this whole mystery of what was he before and what is he going to be after? Because after this, I don't know if he's going to fight chickens anymore or if he's just going to become a judge. He talks about how, you can get paid $150 a match if you are a SCT medal winner and they call you up to judge at any of these tournaments. Okay, great. But is that your life now? Is that how you're doing everything? I love that it's ambiguous, though, as you'll hear in the interview with Kayla Janice in a few minutes, that there is mention of Frank Mansfield in, I believe, Miami Blues, and that you find out that he ended up getting married later on. I don't know if it's with Mary Elizabeth. I think probably not, but yeah, it is funny that you hear a little Frank Mansfield, and that Williford will make references. It's not nearly that Elmore Leonard connected universe, but you do get a little nod here and there to other things.
But he also used the name Berenice. I know we've said Bernice a few times in this, but it's in the book. It's Berenice is the which is an unusual name. It at least sounds that way to me. I don't think I've ever met any Berenice, but she's also the name of the lead female character in Burnt Orange Heresies. He did maybe just have these names that he liked to use. And something else that I think of the Warren Oates and Cockfighter, Frank Mansfield, as like the Chris Cooper character in Adaptation. This guy who's like obsessive about things and he masters them. And then I'm done with that. Fuck fish. I was real into fish. And then I decided one day, fuck fish. And I moved on to, the next thing. And that little thing at the beginning about the different things he had pursued and had mastered. And in the book, guitar playing really is part of that too, though it's pretty sure he said he goes to great lengths to say he never took a lesson. He just picked it up and knew how to play. And one of his memoirs, I was looking for a street talking about his formative years. He said that his grandmother was a big believer in inherited talents and assumed that someday Charles would be able to play the piano because his mother had. And so she kept a piano in the house. He never really had any interest in it. But his grandmother really believed that someday he'll just be able to sit down and play that piano, not take lessons and things like that. But I think that's kind of a through line in a lot of Williford's books. He has these characters who just have an innate sense of, especially something artistic or creative. I think of The Woman Chaser, where the Richard Hudson character just starts dancing ballet with his mother, who's of course a trained ballerina, but he's just one day, yeah, I'm going to do that. And he takes up filmmaking, never having been to film school or anything like that. And he makes a perfect movie, right? I think these things are relined in a lot of Williford's stuff, just people with these inborn talents, and they're not too interested in explaining that.
Jamie Figueres in the Burnt Orange Heresy, who, paints that perfect painting after the master has passed away. Yeah, I forgot that I wrote a piece about Williford years and years ago, and I opened it with a quote from the Burnt Orange Heresy, which was Bernice and our main character talking, and he says, "A boy who doesn't have a father around doesn't develop a superego." And then she says, "That's silly. Superego is only a jargon word for conscience, and everybody's got a conscience." And he says, "Have it your way, Bernice." And I'm like, yeah, not all of these characters that Williford writes do have consciences. They could be even Junior. I can't remember Junior's last name, but Junior from Miami Blues. He had no conscience and was just out for himself. And I love that. I loved all of these books, and just being able to revisit Cockfighter for this and Cockfighter Journal, I was just tickled to be able to read about that. And even inside of Cockfighter, you've got his personal recollections as Frank Mansfield, where he's talking about being in the Philippines and watching cockfights over there. And I'm just like, yeah, that really feels like a Williford thing. Like, I think Williford and all of his protagonists share a lot of DNA, which may be unpleasant or not. But I think that, he was a terrific writer and wrote about some really twisted characters.
And I know what I'm doing. I need to seriously, why haven't I read? It's ridiculous. What a wonderful world we live in. We do have access to so much great art. One can never get bored. This is why I don't trust people that are like, I'm bored. I'm like, how can you get bored? There's so much to do. There's so much to see.
And it's so much easier to find his books now than it used to be. So many of them have come back in print. I just picked up a new version of The Machine Ward 11, which has I can't even begin to pronounce the name of it, but it's telling fortunes with chickens. So it's a precursor to Cockfighter in there. I know it starts with an A, but I'm not even going to try to pronounce that word.
Yeah. Also, this is an aside, but how amazing was Harry Dean Stanton's style in this film? His character, those shoes.
He wears those two-tone shoes because he can't make up his mind. He's an ambivalent character. It's the guy that wears the belt and suspenders in Once Upon a Time in the West. Yeah, how can I trust you if you can't even trust your own damn pants?
Yes. I have in my notes, and I don't even know what this phrase means. It just came to me. I was like, he's dressed like a Kentucky pimp. Apparently in my brain, that's what a Kentucky pimp should look like. Amazing.
He's so good. I love Harry Dean. He is just so good. Can you imagine? Because those guys are probably sitting around playing guitar to each other because War Notes could play in real life. And of course, we know Harry Dean could play. Those guys probably just going back and forth, trading shots, singing songs. Oh, man, oh, man.
I how was there not like a tectonic plate shifted with these men being together in the same space? It's amazing. Yeah, this is such a cool film. And one thing that hits me is there's a line of dialogue about where he says the chicken has the brain size of a pea, but they know how to fight. They have that instinct. And it hits me because I have, and this may be just my own theory, I feel like our species, humanity, we have a really bad tendency to, we can justify any sort of act of cruelty. Doesn't mean we should. We don't. I'm just the general we, obviously. But, and because it's like these poor animals. And this is, but again, it's like coming from Lisa, not judging the people doing it, especially because this also was set in a time period where it was, we get whiffs that it's starting to get illegal in the film, but it's still got that racist senator. I felt bad for Omar. That senator was terrible. And which means, of course, I can easily believe him being a senator in real life. He just makes some nasty comment about Polish people. And poor Omar's, I said, I'm third generation. He's acting like I just got off the boat. The whole pageantry of the senator and his wife, everybody dudded up. And it's cockfighting. It's, I don't know, it's such a bizarre juxtaposition. Yeah, that of the two-tone shoes of Harry Dean Stanton. God bless.
For as good a cast as it is, I'm delighted that Wilford himself held up so well. I can't believe he didn't do more acting. I did watch The Thunder and Lightning because he was in the cast. And yeah, it's just the one scene, just a real brief cameo, but like she was so great in that role. And I looked up in the book the way the Ed Middleton character is introduced. This is Frank Mansfield's inner monologue. He said, Ed Middleton is one of my favorite people. He's in his early 60s. And if I happen to live long enough, I want to be exactly like him someday. He's a big man with a big voice and a big paunch, except for a bumpy, bulbous nose with a few broken blood vessels here and there on his bright red surface. His face is smooth and white with shiny look of a dog's favorite bone. And like, he's describing himself. He wrote Cockfighter came out, the novel, in 1962. The movie didn't come out till 1974, and he was apparently not even supposed to be in it, like cast very late in the process as the Ed Middleton character. And shit, sounds like he's describing himself right there. He had that bulbous nose with broken blood vessels and the big paunch and the big voice. But he's somebody that he comes across very likable, very easy to see someone like Frank admiring him and wanting to be like that. Was he always intending to play this character someday? Or I don't know, but I think a great presence in the film. And I wish he'd done more acting.
I really liked when Frank comes back and you can tell Middleton's pissed. Like, you called me on my bluff.
Yeah, didn't expect you to sell your house.
Leave him alone. Just like he gets mad at his wife because he can't get mad at Frank. And by the way, the producer I was trying to think of is John Davison. We're going to take a break and play an interview with Kayla Janice, author of the new book, Cockfight, A Fable of Failure, right after these brief messages.
Put on your swim fins, film fans, and take a deep breath, because you're about to go on a deep dive into cinema with the Deep Dive Film Talk podcast. Whether you're a casual viewer or a seasoned cinephile, this podcast is your guide to understanding mind-bending cinema. Join us for deep dives into films that blur the lines between reality and fantasy. No film degree required, just an open mind and a sense of adventure. Listen now on Weirding Way Media.
Kayla Janice, it is great having you back in the projection booth, and I'm so excited to talk to you about your new book, all about Cockfighter. Please tell me, how did this book project come about? Because I know you've been working on it for a long time.
I became really obsessed with the film back when Anchor Bay first put it out on DVD, which would have been like 2000 or 2001. They'd been doing a bunch of Monte Hellman reissues. And So I became obsessed with the character of Frank Mansfield, kind of based on the film. So it was before I had read the book. But I didn't really decide to start doing a book about it until about 2015. And originally the idea just started as it was like one of those labels. I think it was like, God, not Midnight Marquee. It was like one of the British labels that does the books that are just about one movie, 25 pages. It wasn't Devil's Advocates, but it was like one of the other ones that Neil Snowden is the editor. Anyways, they were doing a call out for pitches for their book line. So I said, oh, I know a movie I'd want to do a book about, Cockfighter. And they rejected it. And partially they may have rejected because the movies can't screen in the UK. And so if you have a UK specific book label of classics, they obviously can't say some. So I could never pitch to the BFI as a BFI classic if they're not allowed to even play it there. So it was limited where I could even pitch that idea. But then I just realized that if I did get a deal like that, I would be stuck with a book that had a handful of pictures that was all black and white. I wouldn't have any control over the paper stock, and I'm way too picky. So maybe I'll just do it myself. And that way I can just do it however I want. And so I didn't try very hard to find another publisher for it. I just decided to start working on it. And then in 2016 was when I did my first interviews for it. Although I had stayed at Monte Hellman's Airbnb before I had ever decided to do a book about Cockfighter. It was like 2014. So when my book Kid Power came out, I was in LA promoting that book. And I was going to be there for 9 days and I had to stay somewhere. And my friend Donna McRae had stayed at Monte Hellman's Airbnb and was raving about it. And I was like, oh my God, he has an Airbnb. And I looked it up on Airbnb and there it was. It was like Monte's picture. And he's like, come stay with me. I love talking about movies with people. And I was like, oh my God, this is like a dream. So I went and I stayed there and he made me breakfast every day. He made me the same breakfast every day. I was not allowed to deviate in any way from the menu that he had prepared. I wanted scrambled eggs instead of fried eggs. And he was like, no, scrambled eggs are bad for you. You have to eat this. I don't know how fried egg is better than a scrambled egg. But anyways, so it was funny. He had his way of doing things. He had his routines. And him having these people coming through the house as guests were like his social life in a way. He didn't seem to go out very much. So it was like that was his social life, was people would come to him. He would talk about movies, except that, so I was there and he has this big poster of 2-lane blacktop in the kitchen. And he starts talking about it somehow. And I said, oh, my favorite movie of yours is Cockfighter. And he just goes, worst picture I ever made. And I said, worse than Silent Night, Deadly Night 3? And he says, I like Silent Night, Deadly Night 3. Silent Night, Deadly Night 3, I got to do everything I wanted. I got to make the movie I wanted to make, whether or not you like it. But I never got to do that. The script revisions were stopped. I never felt like I really got to finish it. And so I just think it's like my worst movie because of that. So then after that, it seemed like he was definitely way more quiet around me after that. Because there was another guest staying in the house and he would just laugh at her all the time. And then with me, he was really quiet. And I felt like he had just lost respect for me or thought I had like no taste in movies or something because this was my favorite movie of his. And obviously, like I kept trying to wear him down. I was there for 9 more days. And I also interviewed him like several times officially, like after that, because I did not interview him formally while I was there because I didn't yet know I was going to be doing a book. Eventually got to the point where, my last interview with him, he was just like, it'll never be my favorite. And that was as good as it was going to get. But yeah, so it started in this backwards way where I became obsessed with film for a long time. I went to cockfights for real. I stayed at Monte Hellman's house. And then a couple of years after that, then I decided I was going to try to do a book about it. And I was also losing people a lot while the book was being written. It took me so long to write because I work full time and I'm working on all these other things. And so if there's nobody like paying you to do something, it's really hard to prioritize it. It always ends up being the last priority. So I was losing people. People were passing away that worked on the film. Harry Dean Stanton died like a month before I was supposed to interview him. Like I was coming to LA to interview him and then he died like a month before. So stuff like that. And then one of the casting agents, Don Phillips, like he didn't want to do an interview. He's like, many people I found just didn't like the movie, like people who worked on it and didn't want to talk about it. And I couldn't get a whole lot of elaboration as to why, whether it was like because of the cockfighting or what. But Don Phillips, the casting agent, was also like Michael Chinich and Don Phillips both cast it together and they both had nothing to say about it. They were just like, least favorite movie of anything I worked on. And they went on to do like Fast Times and John Hughes movies and all kinds of stuff. Like I think Dazed and Confused, one of them did too. So much bigger things, much bigger and more important things than what they considered Cockfighter to be. But anyway, so that's like how it all happened.
One, I love the way that you structure the book and the way that you sectioned it off into so many of the people that were behind it, the actual sport of cockfighting. You go into so much detail on that I never would have known otherwise. It was super educational.
Well, that's great because I felt there is actually so much more detail that I could have gone into. It was just getting bogged down with like too much detail. So I kept in enough so that people could get a sense of what some of the things were called and what the rationale was behind certain things. But then also what's really important, I think, to the story of Cockfighter, the book and the film, is the kind of history of the sport and the way that history is still held up by a lot of the people that participate in it as like an important connection they have to their past.
And then also just the idea of the Southern Gothic and how does cockfighting play into Southern culture. And even when you get into the role of women in cockfighting or the role of African Americans in cockfighting, it just, you dig so deep and have taught me so much more about that than I ever knew I thought I needed to know.
Probably more than you needed to know. But yeah, obviously the thing about women was super interesting to me because it was like, because being a woman, having gone to cockfights, I experienced the thing of being a rarity in the audience. Like there's a lot of women at cockfights, but they are working at the cockfights. They're working at the concession stands. They're working at the ticket booth. They're working at live merch tables. So there's like all kinds of women that are put to work in the cockfighting world, but there weren't a whole ton of them just sitting there enjoying the sport or making bets or whatever. That said, the audiences were relatively diverse in terms of ages, classes. There was one fight I saw where it was like a kid, like a little kid, and then like his dad, and then the grandpa, all fought the same day. And the little kid was like, I don't know, maybe 12 at the most. And it was like this whole family of cockfighters. But yeah, the thing about women was just important to me because in the book and in the movie, and actually in Charles Wilford's books, like I've not read every book that he wrote, but I've probably read like 20 of his books now. And women are just like an annoyance. They're just like in the way, nagging or annoying the men. And obviously in the film, they tried to rectify that a bit by adding a bit more character from Mary Elizabeth, like making her a little bit more sassy than she is in the book and stuff, and giving her a little bit of humor and stuff. But overall, it was like, yeah, I just was interested in this kind of absence and curious about whether that reflected the real cockfighting world. And then, of course, through researching that, I found that so many of the editors of the cockfighting magazines were all women. So that was super interesting. So I feel like in the future, that's something I actually want to look into more. I want to do a bit more to document these women's careers.
It makes total sense that there's a magazine dedicated to cockfighting, or there was, but it just never even crossed my radar. I was like, what? There was a magazine dedicated to this?
Yeah, there's several.
Wow.
Yeah, there's like Feathered Warrior, Grit and Steel, The Gamecock. Those are the three I know of. There's probably more. But
and speaking of people that we lost along the way, it was great to read Roger Corman and some of his thoughts about the movie and his history with it as well. That was delightful.
Yeah. Roger was super helpful. I would say I interviewed Roger. Like I would email him whenever I just had odd questions. So there were lots of times where it wasn't even like a formal interview. It would just be some question that I didn't have the answer to. So I would send an email to his assistant or whatever. I didn't have his email. And then his assistant would get back to me with the answers and stuff. So he was just helpful along the way. And you could tell that he was like, despite the fact that the movie flopped and that it's famously the only movie he ever lost money on and stuff like that, you could tell he liked the movie a lot and thought it was a good movie. And that he thought it was a shame that it never hit. Not financial, not because he was, oh, I wish it made money. Yes, I'm sure he wished it made money. But he just thought it was a shame that it was a good movie that just didn't find its audience. And so he was really supportive of anything that would celebrate Cockfighter. So that was great.
And the ways that he tried to save it by having it recut or the trailers and the titles and what you had 4 different titles it was under at one point.
Yeah, it was like Cockfighter and then it was, and it's interesting because he claims these titles were never actually officially used, but there are ads that show the titles of Wild Drifter and Gambling Man in some of the different regions. So he thinks that those titles were just like tested, like they surveyed people asking, which title do you think is better? And he thought that those titles were never actually used on the prints or anything, but apparently they were, like occasionally on some prints and a few months after it was released as Cockfighter. And then Born to Kill was the title that stuck, and that one came into use, I think it was March of the next year. So it was like, they talk about it anecdotally, like when you're interviewing people, their timelines are really shaky. They'll talk about something like it was immediate or a long time ago or whatever, but it's actually the opposite sometimes. So I think when they tell the story anecdotally, it's like Cockfighter flop. We knew on the Friday it was failure. By Monday, we had a whole new campaign and it was Born to Kill, whatever. 5 months later, it was Born to Kill. Yes, I'm sure they knew right away that it was going to flop, but the new ad campaign was not in place the next week. It was like many months later. And it did do better as Born to Kill, but not, as Roger said, not appreciably so.
I know you spent a lot of years working on this. It also sounds like you put a lot of miles on your car or on your frequent flyers to go around all these different places too.
Now I'm like, I do everything to get the miles. I could never figure out. I'm like, how do people get these like free flights everywhere? Air miles. Be loyal always to the same airline because I was like, I just go on Expedia and buy whatever's the cheapest usually. And you can't rack up the miles that way. So anyway, no, I did not get any benefit from traveling around, but I did travel a lot. Like I went to Charles Wilford's archive several times, which is amazing. It's just amazing when you go into any archive like that. You're just like, oh my God, like you're so grateful that people take care to document this stuff and just keep it because some little thing that like 2 people in the world are going to care about. That's the thing that has all the answers or whatever. And whenever you go into an archive, you appreciate like how shitty Google searches are. You're just like people who rely on Google searches to do all their research for everything. And then you're like, oh my God, like it's like when you're actually handling these like old documents and manuscripts and being able to see in the case of Charles Wilford, his not only revisions to the script and stuff, but also earlier short stories where he has the character of Frank Mansfield and he's like trying to work out what he wants to do with this character. And then also his stepson, Stephen Hooker, wrote some songs for Cockfighter because in the book of Cockfighter, he has this whole detour where he's trying to raise money and he's playing the guitar in a nightclub. And he has these 3 songs and they're like the only songs he knows. He's made up these songs himself and he just plays the same songs over and over again. And his stepson actually wrote songs of these songs and they have the recordings of them in this archive.
Wow.
So I was actually going to ask him for permission to see if I could give them to you for your podcast.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So he feels like he's embarrassed of them. Like they're really amateurish and whatever. Cause I had asked him, could I give it to somebody as like a press scoop or something? And he's, I don't know. So, but maybe he would allow it for the podcast or something. But he said Charles Wilford actually wrote the lyrics, because they do have lyrics, because the idea is that these songs were written by Frank before he had his vow of silence. And there's lyric versions and instrumental versions. But yeah, it's so interesting because there's so much world building happening that you can see in the archive. And it goes even past just other references, like in the book, The Shark Infested Custard. The very opening conversation is a conversation of these four guys sitting around talking about Tulane Blacktop.
Right.
And it's clearly a reference to this experience that Charles Wilford had. I also feel, I don't know, have you read that book? The Shark Infested?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because that scene, when I was reading it, I kept thinking, this just reminded me so much of the scene at the beginning of Death Crew of the women sitting around talking about like Vanishing Point or whatever. I was like, that scene in Death Proof just seems like this scene. I was like, I wonder if Tarantino read this and then wrote that scene based on it. But my point is just that Charles Wilford had all these connections all through his career, before Cockfighter and after Cockfighter, like linking to it. And so I just found that was my very last afterword in my book, is called Cockfighter Aspires to Endlessness. And it's partially because of that. And partially that's a tribute to Monte, in the sense it's a riff on a line from Siegfried Krakauer's theory of film. Is like a chapter that's called something like that. Not about Cock. But yeah, so I felt like the world building that Wilford was doing was really interesting. And then also just the fact, this is a spoiler, so you may want to cut it out, but just the fact that in Miami Blues at the very end, she marries Frank Mansfield. It's just little things like that are like really interesting.
Yeah, you're talking to the other person who would love to go to the Williford archive. So that's definitely now on my bucket list, is to make my way down there.
Yeah. They even have a copy of the book that was, I can't remember, I think it was Sideswipe. And it was like somebody bought a hardcover of Sideswipe and thought they hated it so much they shot it like 6 times. And they sent it back to him with a note saying, this is what I think of your shitty book. And that's in the archive, the book that's all shot up.
And you get to talk to Betsy as well.
Oh, yeah. Betsy was like the hero of this project to me. She saved me from despair at the last moment. She gave me access to use the stuff from the archive, because obviously, if you read other books about Monte Hellman, they will reference these documents. Like Charles Tatum has a book like in French where he references some of the letters from New World and stuff like that, but he doesn't show them. He just like references them. And I think at one point he types out like what one of the letters says, but she let me actually use the letters and print them in the book, which I also thought was important because you get to see what thoughtful notes Roger Corman gives, because whether it's him or his assistant, Francis Dole, or who was known as Francis Kimbrough at the time. So in some cases, it's Roger giving the notes. In other cases, it's Francis giving the notes, but obviously in consultation with Roger. But they give such thoughtful and respectful notes to Charles Wilford about ways that he can work on this script. And I just feel you don't get that from studio executives and stuff and agents and producers. Everybody just gives such crappy, thoughtless, clueless notes now. And so I thought it was really important to print those letters in full and have people see what kind of a creative producer Roger Corman was, that he was not just a money-minded producer, even though he obviously had skills with money and was very good at business. But he was that kind of rare mix of somebody who was both. He was like an incredibly creative and intellectual person, but also very good with money and business. So he really was like a unique individual.
Well, it was great too that you were able to print a couple pages from the script as well and show some of the stuff that had been cut out.
That to me was like the other thing going to the archive, was finding, first of all, the earliest versions of the script where it still has the character of Berenice in it. So that was an important thing. But then the fact that there were these 2 identical scripts, and the only difference was on one of them, there were like an additional 2 pages with this alternate ending that is clearly more of an exploitation film ending. And I was like, wow, I've never even heard of this ending. And I didn't know if he ever showed it to Roger Corman. I didn't know if he offered it as an option of a more traditional exploitation film ending or what. But either way, it was there in the archive. And I was like, this is really cool. So Betsy let me use it. And then the other thing she was happy that I wanted to use was the letter from Kate Millett. The postcard from Kate Millett, who, for people who don't know, was like a rock star feminist in the early 70s. And she was like a household name at the time. And Charles Wilford wrote her a letter saying that he wanted to send her his new book and that he had this theory that women were raping men with food. Obviously, I go into detail about that in the book, but then she just wrote him back this like funny letter saying, keep eating. And I just thought that was so funny that he would send a letter to Kate Millett. It's like radical feminist. But yeah, so Betsy is great. I'm pretty sure you've spoken to Betsy before too. I think you were the one that was really saying, you should really get in touch with Betsy. And I was like really intimidated too at first. But then when I talked to her, she was just so amazing and she's so funny. You can tell she has this kind of like straight-faced humor, like really cutting humor. They must have been quite a pair together. But yeah, so she really helped out a ton with the book, which was awesome.
Well, it was nice to read some of the New World guys, the Arkush and Dante and Teague, those guys, just superstars, and just their role in the making of the campaigns or the editing of the film. Wonderful to read some of those stories, especially the Arkush and Dante stuff. They must have been together, right, when you were interviewing them? Because they felt like a comedy
together.
team. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what it was like. That was the first section of the book that really had an oral history element to it, because I just go and like bam, like back and forth between them. And then I ended up doing that a little bit in earlier parts of the book just to balance it out more. But yeah, it was really great talk. Whenever you interview people together, it's fun because they make each other laugh and they make each other remember stuff. And yeah, so that was like super fun. They clearly had so much fun in those days, like editing the trailers and coming up with the marketing campaigns with John Davison and stuff. So yeah, it was a real thrill getting to talk to the people who were involved in the kind of post-production release of the film. The harder part, obviously, was the set, the making of the film, trying to find because so many people had died who were in the film or had important roles on the film, that like trying to bring that to life was a challenge. And luckily, I had a couple of people who had very good memories of a lot of stuff, namely production manager Peter Kornberg and Don Walters, who was like the first AD. So they remembered stuff really well. But yeah, that was like, and then at the very last minute, I got the interview with Earl MacRoush. That was insane because I'd been trying to reach him for 5 years. And then the book was supposed to go to print. This is like a miracle. Okay. So the book is supposed to go to print on Tuesday night because on Wednesday morning, my designer is leaving town on a vacation. So he's about to deliver the files to the printer. And then he realizes, oh shit, something went wrong with all the footnotes. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, all the footnotes have gone totally out of order. I was like, what? And he was like, and I have to leave. I don't have time to fix this. Like, I have to get on plane. And I was like, oh my God, like we're going to miss our print deadline. And I already had Fantasia set up to do a screening there. So I was like, there's no way. That's it. The book's not going to be ready in time. I'm going to have to cancel the event. And so I contacted the printer. I let them know the book wouldn't be in until the next week after the guy got back. And so I was super bummed out. I'm just thinking, God, I can't believe like stupid footnotes are making me miss my own book launch. So I wake up the next morning. I'm all bummed out. The first thing I get is this like ping on my phone, and it's Earl Roush. His nickname is Mac. I've just been reading it so long that I always say Earl MacRoush. But anyway, it's him. And he's just like, I heard you've been trying to reach me. And I was like, oh my God. It was like, and so if the book had gone to print when it was supposed to, it wouldn't have that interview in it.
Wow.
So it was like, I said, can you do an interview like in the next 2 days? And he was like, yes. So we did it and I got it in the book. And it was, yeah, And to me, it was great because it cleared up so many questions I had about the script revisions, because I had heard from both Francis Dole and Monte Hellman that Mac had done revisions on the script, but nobody could remember what revisions he had done or when he had done the revisions, like what the timeline was. And the way that Francis spoke about it was almost as though they were on set at the same time in different hotel rooms working on different scripts. So there were so many questions I had, and Monty couldn't remember, especially as it got to the point where, as I got closer to the end of the book, and as he got older, and he'd also had like an accident at some point and had some brain surgery and stuff. But it was like, as you're getting closer to finishing a book is when you start getting more and more very detailed things that you need. You start off asking these broad, generic questions, and then it just gets more and more detailed as you go along. So by the time I was getting into the real nitty gritty of stuff, Monty was not capable of answering those questions. He just didn't remember enough anymore. So there was a lot of vague stuff originally in that chapter about what Earl McRouch may or may not have written. And then thankfully I got that interview and it just cleared up everything, including like this speech that Mary Elizabeth has. And I said, I think you wrote this speech that she has by the lake with Warren Oates. And he was like, I don't know, that doesn't sound familiar. And I said, I'm positive. I just feel positive he wrote it because like I read one of his books. He wrote this book called Arkansas Adios, which I've read. And I was like, first of all, it sounds like the writer of that book wrote this anecdote. And second of all, Charles Wilford has never given a monologue to a woman like in any of the books I've read. So it just seems like it'd be out of character for her to have this funny monologue. And so he's like, what is the story again? So I transcribed the story from the film. And then he wrote back and was, oh my God. He literally wrote, OMG. He's not only did I write that, it's a true story.
Oh, wow.
That happened to somebody I went to high school with. I've told that story a million times. I don't know why I didn't click when you first mentioned it. That was great. I felt very validated by having picked out that he had written that. But yeah, so it was an adventure. It's the first time I've done a book project that really required the memories of other people for it to work. Obviously, House of Psychotic Women is so personal that it's really just stated from the outset. This is just how I remember things, whether it's true or not, doesn't matter, because this is how I remember it. And it's based on my own memories and my own perspective, my own take on things. But when you're doing a book like this, you're dealing with other people's lives, like experiences they had that you are just reporting on based on this disparate information coming in from different sources, some of which does not cohere with each other. And so I still am in terror that it's full of things that are just wrong for people who are going to be like, that's not what I meant or whatever. But I worked on it for 8 years and I feel like bit my all.
You mentioned the design, and the design of the book is beautiful. It just looks so good.
Yeah, so Luke Insect designed it. He also did the folk horror box set that I did with Severin. He also did the Black Emmanuel box set. And he did the Warped and Faded book that I edited about the American Genre Film Archive. And he's like a really versatile designer, but he loves psychedelic stuff. And I also really like the kind of overlay effects and registration being off from the images and stuff like this. So there's like a certain place where our tastes meet. And I also knew that doing an entire book about one movie, fair use of images becomes a problem. Like when I'm doing a book like House of Psychotic Women and I have 300 movies in it and I'm only using one picture from each movie, nobody's really going to freak out about that. But if you're doing the entire book about one movie and every picture in that book is from that movie, that's pushing the limits of fair use. You can't get away with that. So I had to think of some other way to illustrate the book without totally abusing the fair use thing and like Cockfighter images. So it's full of other images that are not from Cockfighter that are like more like atmospheric images or related somehow to the subject matter that's being talked about. but I also like every image is manipulated in some way. So they're usually not just stills from Cockfighter or posters from Cockfighter. There's usually 2 or 3 images like overlaid, like interplaying with each other. And so part of that design was like a practical consideration, because in fair use, part of fair use is that if people want to sue you, they have to prove that you've somehow impinged on their ability to commercially exploit that thing. So if I was to do this beautiful book all about Cockfighter and every picture is like a perfect reproduction of a still from Cockfighter, that would prevent like Shout Factory, who now owns it, to make their own book about Cockfighter that's full of images. Whereas a book like this, where there's 3 images jumbled up together in one, it does not prevent them from doing like a coffee table book of all these beautifully pristine stills from the movie. So it's just, it doesn't guarantee anything, but it's just one of the considerations I had to not abuse it. And then in the meantime, those kinds of challenges lead you to make creative decisions that ultimately make the book stand out more.
You mentioned the screening up in Fantasia. How did that go, and how do audiences react to Cockfighter in 2024?
There were several people that came out and were like, there was a lot of cockfighting. But other people found it really interesting. And I don't know how much I read the introduction to my book before the screening. And so I did have a lot of people that said they were glad I did that, because it just put them in the right mind frame to appreciate things about the film. Because the thing is, if you go into the film and you're just focused on how upsetting the cockfighting is, you miss everything else. If you're just focused on that, oh, this is awful, I don't want to see this, then you're not paying attention to everything else in the movie, because that's overpowering you. So hopefully my introduction helped to diffuse that a little bit, so that they knew other things that they should be looking out for with the characters and stuff like that. For the most part, people seem to, at the very least, respect it when they came out. Nobody was outraged. Nobody was like, I'm going to go call the SPCA and report you guys for playing this movie or anything. Which, like, every theater I contacted about doing a book launch, like, many of them asked me, they're like, do you expect protests? I was like, oh God, I didn't even think about that. I mean, maybe, but the movie's so old. Those chickens they would be dead either way now.
Right.
But also, I don't know. It is interesting. It really only plays in the context of like a Monte Hellman retrospective. And so you typically don't have the word Cockfighter on the marquee of the theater. It's Monte Hellman retrospective. So it's not going to trigger those people who are like going to get upset about it, because it's couched inside this larger retrospective, because it doesn't actually play on its own that often, very many places. The Mayfair in Ottawa, I think, has actually played it, because Lee DeMarbe, who runs that theater, has his own print of it. So there are these collector prints out there. And so some of those people, I think, have played it occasionally. But yeah, it does, it's pretty underplayed. But I guess lots of Monte Hellman's movies are, other than T-Lane Blacktop.
It's not like you go see Iguana on a retro screening.
Yeah, but even like China 9, Liberty 37, which is another film of his people really love, but you never see that anywhere. But yeah, I guess The Shooting, Ride in the Whirlwind, Two-Lane Blacktop, those are the ones that get played the most.
9 years later, book's finally out. What's next for you? You are like the busiest person that I know. You put me to shame when it comes to your projects.
That's funny, because I always think that about Kat Ellinger and Alexandra Heller-Nicholas. I'm like, oh my God, they do so much. I feel like just a slob sitting here doing nothing. But yeah, so I am working on a couple more box sets for Severin. I have 2 more box sets that are supposed to come out this year that are pretty much finished. They're just like in the last touches of QCing and manufacturing problems and whatever. But my work on them is pretty much done. And then on a script, like an actual narrative script for an unannounced project. And then I have the Severin optioned the book Killing for Culture, the David Korekis and David Slater book that came out in the 90s, which is like kind of the seminal book studying mondo film and snuff film and death film and stuff like this. And so we optioned it to make a documentary, and that's going to be my next documentary that I make. And it's still a couple of years away because there's a lot of research and reading and everything I want to do aside from that book. It's not going to be just like a straight adaptation of that book. It's going to be focused on what I want to focus on from that book. And then a bunch of stuff that's just interviewing different people. So it won't be like just David Koretzky's and David Slater and their book. It's going to be using that as like the center, but then building around it. And partially, it's such a grim topic that it has to be a movie people would want to watch. It's going from the Woodlands Darkened Days Bewitched, which has a hopeful ending. It's got a lot of harsh imagery, but it has a lot of beautiful imagery, and it ends on a relatively uplifting note about people being connected and stuff like this. And then I feel like then going from that to Killing for Culture, which is about snuff films, is the challenge just to make a film that can resonate with people in the same way they. And it's like, how do you do that when the subject matter is so grim and aesthetically the films are so grim? So that's one of the things I'm trying to play with is the aesthetics a lot. And yeah, there's like certain things about it that it's like too early to talk about, but there's definitely like an angle that I'm taking that I think will make it interesting for the average person. Obviously, there's people who love death films and Mondo films and snuff films who would watch it no matter what. But I do want it to be able to play for a person who isn't like a collector of that kind of material. So that's the next like big thing I'm working on. I also have this book that I've been editing forever. It's like the Cockfighter book. It's been like a real albatross, which is my book about Robert Downey Sr.'s films. And so that's an anthology book. And my friend Clint Enns and I started putting it together and like, God, I think it was right around the same time as I started thinking about Cockfighter. So it was like 2015. And at first we were having trouble. It's like the only book where I've had trouble getting people to write the chapters. Like when we first started hitting people up, there was a lot of people who felt that they didn't know his catalog well enough. Like they'd see one movie of his and they're like, actually, I don't really know films that well. Or a lot of people who are like, they didn't know how to read his films. They were like, I don't know how to understand the humor in his film. And then there was like people who had written extensively about his films. Many of those people didn't want to write extensively again.
Right.
They're like, I already did that. So yeah, so that's been like a real challenge. And so we have, I would say 90% of a book, but I'm not 100% happy with it. And so it keeps being delayed as I'm trying to find these missing pieces that'll make me happy and make me feel like, okay, this is enough strong material. And then the other thing too is, again, dealing with, similar with the Cockfighter book, is how do you illustrate it when it's all one person's IP? So trying to find a creative way to do that while still being respectful. And the thing too is like, my book it's a pretty much semi-academic book of essays. So it's not the final word. It's not a biography, nothing like that. So there's absolutely room for more studies of Robert Downey Sr. after this book comes out. So I definitely don't want to do anything that makes people feel like, oh, I can't do my book now or whatever. I definitely want it to be just one of the first, because to me, his work is so rich and deserving of analysis, even though he's like so against his films being analyzed. But he really deserves it. His work deserves it. And so I feel like there should be 5 books about his work. And the fact that people have trouble reading his films is all the more reason why we need these studies. So I'm still chipping away at that. And then also working on a book with my friend Amy Searles about the depiction of horror fandom in film and television, because that's something that's of interest to me, because I've seen horror fandom change so much in real life. And I've seen those reflections happening in movies and stuff, to where you can have a horror fan in a movie now and no one even comments on it. It's just like somebody with the Evil Dead shirt is like totally normal. Whereas any time before the 1980s, if that were to happen, that person would be pathologized in the narrative of the film. So we just wanted to do almost like an encyclopedia in a way of films and television throughout the 20th century depicting these changes in horror fandom. So that's something that Amy and I have been working on for a while too.
That sounds fascinating, as does the Robert Downey Sr. stuff, as does the Killing for Culture documentary. This all sounds amazing.
I feel inspired constantly. Everything inspires me. I feel like every conversation I have, every book I read, every movie I watch, just looking at my cat, looking out the window, everything is, it's weird. Like I live on an island and I never see anybody, but I still feel totally overstimulated. Like the world just has so much cool stuff going on that it's like hard to even pick like what to do next. So I'm just glad that like my stuff gets to be a little piece of this like building block of all these cultural studies and everything.
Yeah. And some of the things that you've been, behind with not only your book with House of Psychotic Women, but then also the movies that came out from that. And just, I told you all those years ago when the first version came out, I was just like, damn you, Kayla, for making my watch list so much longer. But then it's great that there's actually releases of these movies now that are tied into the book. That was fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool, especially with some of the movies, like something like the Mapu Page. I feel totally, after my book came out, that movie had a second life. Like Karen Arthur gets asked to come and present screenings pretty frequently since the book came out. And it was like, it's not like nobody remembered that movie. Scorpion, I think, put it out before my book came out. Like somebody had put it out on a Blu-ray. I just don't think it had gotten much attention. It was like somebody's pet movie that they wanted to release, but it didn't really get a whole lot of ink or attention or anything. But the book changed it because a lot of the retrospectives around the book, like festivals and things, would do like a House of Psychotic Women series when the came out. And that would be one of the films that played at almost all of them. Secret Ceremony and that played at so many of the retrospectives. And then, of course, like Possession and The Brood were like the staples. But yeah, so some of those films, it was great to see. And most recently with the reissue, it was like Identikit, the Liz Taylor movie that seemed to have found a new audience through that book. So that was cool.
Kayla, Janice, it is always wonderful talking with you. I appreciate your time because, like I said, I know you're super busy, but this was great. And thank you so much for Cockfighter.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. I thought you were going to like totally destroy me.
Oh, gosh. No, I loved it.
Because I know you're such a Charles Wilford fan. I thought you were totally going to be like, you didn't mention this or you didn't talk about that or whatever. You didn't pick apart the thing I got wrong.
No, not at all. And I don't think you got anything wrong. And I think everything that you brought to the table was great. So I really cannot recommend the book enough to people.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That really makes me very happy.
Coming right at you. Warren Oates, born to kill. In the hustler's world, it's pay or die.
Oh, wow. Hey, Mr. Mansfield, I'm sorry. I didn't bring no cash with me. I was so sure I was going to win and everything. But listen, I got some money at home. I got a lot of it. I'm going to bring it back as soon as I get home.
He's a redneck rebel with a taste for hot women and fast cars. Born to be wild. The law can't touch him at all.
This is a stick-up. Hands over your heads. Anybody who moves gets a head blasted off.
Born to kill. Two high-stakes gamblers out to con every fat cat in the South. The macho movie that ricochets off the screen with a double-barrel action blast. Warren Oates is Born to Kill. Rated R.
We are back and we are talking about Cockfighter. And we mentioned before this whole thing, and Kayla does a fantastic job in her research of coming up with the whole post-release of Cockfighter and all the different titles and went through. And I never did find anything that really supported like the Gambling Man and what's the other one? The Hard Fighter, Wild Fights or whatever it's called. But I do have a Born to Kill poster, which I'm very proud of, which changes the artwork significantly and puts an axe in Warren Oates' hand, much like Ed Begley Jr. And I guess it's Mary Elizabeth driving the car, and he's like in the car and swinging this axe and stuff. It's pretty fantastic. I was so happy to find that poster at records. Well, this dates at a record store years and years ago, and was able to pick that up. So one of these days, I'm going to get that framed, that and the Cockfighter poster, and I'll just have them looking at each other. That'll be like double Warren Oates. And this was the same year that Warren Oates did Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. How fucking crazy is that? That's one of his all-time performances the same year.
I find it so fascinating, though, about when art house films get re-promoted in these ways that are so lurid, and it doesn't make any sense at all with the natural material. It immediately makes me think of, which just came out a year before Cockfighter, which is tremendous. I call it art house because I think it's brilliant. I think it's a great movie. But that film, at one point it was put out as Daddy's Deadly Darling. The Vinegar Syndrome release has an alternate intro that was tacked on, like Poor White Trash style, where it's implied her father raped her and it's like incest. And then it cuts to this title screen of a woman's ass with the title. It's so bonkers and horrifying because this is a great movie. This is legit a great movie. And they've completely like shat upon it for that crass dollar. It's such a carny tactic. I don't think we see those kind of carny tactics as much with film nowadays, which in some ways is for the better. Films like Cockfighter and Pigs and what we've talked about before, Massacre at Central High, these are serious films. These are really great films. They should be regarded as such, but it was just a different era. And that passage, Mike, you reading that VHS box description earlier, I want to make that an outgoing message on my phone. That is like a meditation tape. I love it so much. It's terrible, but it's amazing.
I wish I could find those other versions, the alternate cuts with Louis Teague says, oh yeah, I added more stuff, more dream sequences. And I know Monte Hellman is like, yeah, there's shots in the finished film that is called Cockfighter that aren't his, like speaking of Jack or Burke's two-tone shoes, like the blood that sprays on the two-tone shoes. Apparently that wasn't a Monte Hellman shot. It doesn't sound like, at least maybe they caught him on a good day, but the audio commentary that was on the old Anchor Bay DVD for this, it didn't sound like he was too angry about that, which was good because, yeah, Kayla's book is fantastic to read, just how curmudgeonly Monte Hellman was about his own movie and just like shutting her down. Oh, that's the worst thing that I made, and just not even wanting to talk to her after she said it's her favorite. I'm like, yeah, no, I got the same treatment from him. It took a long time for him to warm up to me again after I told him how much I love Cockfighter.
It's always so strange when you get to talk to artists about works that have hit you so hard and they act almost like a vampire. See? But at the same time, if you're dealing with studio interference, it's understandable that should put a bitter taste, certainly, in someone's mouth. Though I hate it. I hated that this is a fine film. This is a really intelligent, really beautifully made. There's such a harmony with how every element in this film really comes together. Yeah, the editing, the cinematography, the direction, the writing, the acting, the music. Yeah, every element just really, it's perfectly placed. And yeah, if you didn't know anything about Charles Willeford, you would just think he was another great character actor. He's great. I was like, man, this is a great guy with the mustache. And it's like, oh my God, it's the author. That's so cool. I love the fact that we're getting a book out documenting particularly like Kayla's journey with it. This is a story where people need to be talking about this film. Hopefully, I don't know what status it's at right now for getting like a nice Blu-ray. To me, it seems like it should be primed for it. But God, there are so many terrible movies out in 4K that surely to goodness, it would be cool if somebody did like a Charles Willeford set.
Yeah, I'd love to get a new version of Woman Chaser out there too.
To circle back on that episode from forever ago, they have re-released it, but with a different score because all that original music was so cost prohibitive. So there's a version, but yeah, it doesn't have that awesome score that I talked about. And yeah, I'm looking at a Shout Factory Blu-ray of this. I'm not sure when it was released, but there are absolutely no extras on this, which is a real shame. Looks like a very bare bones Blu-ray. I think you get subtitles. That's about it. Or chapter stops, on-screen biographies of main characters. Yeah.
I'm surprised I didn't mention the menu. And here I was upset that my Blu-ray of Jekyll and Hyde Together Again, it doesn't have any extras. But Cockfighter, come on. Hopefully.
Yeah, because they had a lot more on that old disc. That was nice. And yeah, Dennis Bartok was doing the commentary with Monte Hellman, and I'm trying to remember the other gentleman's name, Stephen Gatos, who was also wearing the Nixon mask. And yeah, was working behind the scenes quite a bit in this one.
Oh, nice. Yeah, Anchor Bay, they did such a beautiful work on their releases. I still treasure all of my Anchor Bay stuff.
I'm also looking at from the language, I think this was a French release on Blu-ray, and you're going to love this. Includes Bande Annonce Originale, so includes the original trailer. I know that's going to get you to buy that one.
All the really cheap DVDs, I would say, interactive menu. Thanks, guys. Which is okay when it's like Bruce Lee fights back from the grave and you paid literally $2 for it. Not that I did that.
Yeah, give me a Williford box set. Give me a Monte Hellman box set. I don't know if like Iguana's ever been released in a good version. I know China 9, Liberty 37. That was another one I had to order from Video Search of Miami. I think that one is available now in good quality. I don't know about, this isn't Monte Hellman. This is another Warren Oates, but I don't know if Barquero has ever been properly released. There's too many good movies out there that people just aren't paying attention to.
When you think of Warren Oates and great trailers, though, have you guys seen the trailer for Dixie Dynamite?
I have a copy of that movie, but I don't think I've seen a trailer for it.
Imagine an American flag and you're just snorting a big old fat rail of illicit drugs off of it. It's got everything. It's got exploding cars, Warren Oates yelling, which I love him yelling. A cop that literally is on a toilet and it explodes and he flies off the toilet. The trailer. If you're having a bad day.
I'm watching the trailer right now and it looks spectacular.
The voiceover is great because it's real bombastic. And the guy's Dixie Dynamite is a blast. And it's like explosion. Warren Oates yelling. He's drinking. There is an A in there. And it's glorious. The only thing missing is like a bikini knife fight or something with some hee-haw honeys. It's just glorious exploitation.
I'm watching the trailer for Born to Kill, and it starts with a semi-truck coming right at us. Us shot not in the movie itself. Pretty good. Oh, man. Yeah, we've got Steve Railsback being taken down, Ed Begley running at the camera with the hatchet in his hand. Oh, yeah, here's some good car crashes and car chases oh, boy. This is so different. I can't wait for people to hear this.
There's a song by The Damned off their first album called Born to Kill. So it's even more just does not work for this actual universe and movie. Amazing.
All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
Malpertuis, ça signifie le repère du renard. Le renard, bien sûr, c'est le diable.
Des ombres. Il est si noble, si généreux et si bon. Ah non, je le sais que vous me haïssez.
Cette odeur de santal, c'est affreux.
Mathias? Très ma volonté.
Ça se sert, cet argent.
Mon rat est fini.
Magnifique.
That's right. We'll be back next week to kick off a confluence of Patreon requests with Shocktober surprises, starting with Harry Camel's Mel Pertwee. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts, Heather and Jed. So, Jedidiah, what is the latest with you, sir?
Just farting around on Twitter and a little bit on the little blog, but low profile, no big projects right now. I finished a project this summer. And not something I can talk about, but hopefully we'll see the light of day someday.
Oh, nice. All right. So mysterious. And Heather, what's happening in your world?
I know I'm not as mysterious, but I did update. The Monte of Heather Patreon has a new piece on Tenuous Island, the Alfred Soul directed oddity starring Denise Winters. And that was a fun piece to write. And that movie is complete bonkers, or one could say bananas, because it has an ape in it. But that I've recently contributed some supplementary work I can't really talk about, but I will tell you it involves the genre of South Korean horror. And I am working on a video that's a little tribute to the glories of Greg House and Outre Cinema. And anytime, if the spirit moves you, you can find more on my Linktree, linktree.com/Mondo Heather.
Thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They're all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
You had to run out. You had problems with all Daddy told you. You had to find out what separates you from lies and how you could weigh up when to gamble and when to take chances with such brilliance. He would make definitive commentary while the blood runs down the chin, and you know you could see he never once had second thoughts. He's got iron will, you see, but his clock is running down. He's confined to your history. He's a man, he kicks a dog, he's a flat out in the gravel. He's got his reasons to be lashing out in a rage, you see. There's no distraction, his arms seem to move like a windmill, and your friendship is the worst thing that he's ever seen. Oh, it's such brilliance. He'll make a definitive commentary while the blood runs down the chin, and know you can see he never once had second thoughts. He's got iron will, you see, but his clock is running down. He's confined to your history.